thought my life was over. I remember the cold feeling spreading through my body, the voices around me fading away, and the last thought that crossed my mind before everything went dark. If I ever get another chance, I won't live the same way again. In my previous life, I was nothing. I was the person everyone could ignore, the person people remembered only when they needed something. I spent years chasing love from people who never planned to give it to me. I believed that if I worked harder, if I was kinder, if I sacrificed enough, someone would finally see my worth. But I was wrong. The people I trusted abandoned me. The people I protected betrayed me. And in the end, I died alone. At least, that was what I thought, until I opened my eyes again. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Soft voices, footsteps, people whispering around me. Is he awake? Careful. The baby just opened his eyes. Baby. I froze. That word made no sense. I tried to move my hands, but my arms were tiny. I tried to speak, but only a strange little sound came out. My heart stopped. No, that wasn't possible. I looked down. Small fingers, tiny arms, a body that didn't belong to me. I wasn't dead. I was reborn. And before I could even understand what was happening, I heard someone say the words that changed my entire life. Congratulations, Mr. Walker. You have a son. Walker. That name felt familiar. Then memories started rushing into my mind. The Walker family, America's most powerful family. A family that controlled industries worth hundreds of billions of dollars. A family that appeared in every business magazine. A family that politicians and CEOs respected. My grandfather, Richard Walker, was a legendary military general who had served his country for decades. My grandmother founded Walker Global Holdings and built the foundation of the family empire. My father, Alexander Walker, the man everyone in America knew. The billionaire who could destroy a company with a single decision. The man people called a genius. The man people also called heartless. And now, I was his son. I almost laughed. In my previous life, I begged for scraps of affection. In this life, I was born into the richest family in America. Life really knew how to make jokes. But then I remembered something. A detail that made my little heart sink. This family wasn't perfect. Not even close. Because before I was born, my father didn't want me. When Alexander Walker learned that my mother was carrying twins, his first reaction wasn't happiness. It was rejection. He wanted the pregnancy ended. He didn't want another child, especially not two. The only reason my sister Emma and I survived was because my grandfather stopped him. I stared at the ceiling, trying to process everything. So I was almost never born. Of course, I couldn't say it out loud. I was just a baby. But inside, my mind was still the same as before. I knew exactly what kind of world I had entered. Money, power, family, those things sounded perfect. But they didn't guarantee love. My biological mother proved that. She never truly wanted children. She wanted the Walker name. She wanted the money. The moment she got what she wanted, she left. I didn't hate her. Actually, I understood her. In my previous life, I learned one painful truth. Not everyone is capable of loving you. And forcing someone to love you only makes you suffer. So I decided something. This life, I would stop begging for affection. If someone loved me, I would accept it. If someone abandoned me, I would walk away. Simple, peaceful. That was my plan. Unfortunately, I didn't know my father had other plans. 2 weeks passed after my birth. My sister Emma and I lived in a private estate called Walker Manor. The staff here treated us well. The nurses cared for us. The housekeepers smiled at us. But there was one person we never saw. Our father, Alexander Walker, the billionaire who owned everything. Except, apparently, time for his children. One afternoon, I heard 2 maids talking quietly outside the nursery. Has Mr. Walker still not visited? No, even after 2 weeks. The other maid sighed. It's always been like this with the Walker family. What do you mean? Previous children were raised the same way. The family believes children should become strong on their own. I almost rolled my eyes. Strong. Or abandoned. But I didn't complain. Honestly, I was fine. Having no father was better than having a cruel one. At least that was what I thought. Until that afternoon, the entire manor suddenly became busy. Prepare the entrance. Mr. Walker is coming. Everyone froze. My father was coming. The nurses immediately adjusted our blankets. The house staff became nervous. I lay in my crib, staring at the ceiling. Why was he coming now? Did he suddenly remember he had children? Or was this just another responsibility he wanted to complete? A few minutes later, the front doors opened. A man walked in. Even before I saw his face, I felt the pressure around him. Everyone became silent. Then I saw him. Alexander Walker, my father. He looked exactly like the pictures from my memories. Tall, cold, perfectly dressed. His expression showed nothing. No excitement, no happiness, no emotion. The house manager, Mrs. Wilson, stepped forward. Mr. Walker, the young master and young miss are inside. Alexander nodded. That's all. Mrs. Wilson looked hurt. Sir, they are your children. For a moment, the entire room became quiet. Alexander didn't answer. He simply walked toward the nursery. I watched him enter. The most powerful businessman in America. The man who controlled thousands of employees. The man who made billion-dollar decisions without hesitation. Now he was standing in front of two babies. He looked at my sister first. Then his eyes moved to me, and he stopped. For some reason, he couldn't look away. I stared back at him. Neither of us moved. Everyone around us held their breath. Then Alexander slowly asked, "Which one is my son?" Mrs. Wilson's eyes widened. She immediately pointed toward me. "Sir, this is your son. Ethan. Ethan, my new name." Alexander stepped closer. I expected nothing. Not warmth. Not love. Nothing. But then something unexpected happened. His expression changed. Only slightly. A tiny crack appeared in that emotionless face. He reached out his hand. Slowly, carefully, like he had never touched anything fragile before. His finger touched my cheek. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Walker looked confused. Because the man who feared nothing suddenly realized something. His son was incredibly small. And incredibly fragile. He whispered, "Why is he so small?" Nobody answered. Because nobody expected those words from him. The coldest billionaire in America was looking at me like he had just discovered something he couldn't understand. And I had no idea that this tiny moment would completely change the Walker family forever. I never expected anything from Alexander Walker. That was the truth. After everything I experienced in my previous life, I stopped believing in miracles. A father's love, family warmth. Those things were just stories people told themselves to feel better. So when Alexander Walker stood in front of my crib, I didn't hope for anything. I simply watched him. I wanted to know what kind of man he really was. The legendary billionaire. The man who could buy companies overnight. The man whose name alone could make business rivals panic. But to me, he was just my father. A father who almost never let me enter this world. Alexander stared at me for a long time. Everyone in the nursery became nervous. Mrs. Wilson lowered her voice. "Sir, would you like to hold him?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Hold him?" "Yes." She nodded carefully. "He is your son." Alexander looked at me again. For some reason, those simple words seemed to affect him. Your son. Not an heir. Not an obligation. Not a problem. A son. After several seconds of silence, he slowly reached out his arms. The entire room stopped breathing. The employees of Walker Manor had seen Alexander Walker do everything. They had seen him negotiate billion-dollar deals. They had seen him destroy competitors with a single sentence. They had seen him stand calmly during dangerous situations. But they had never seen him hesitate. Especially not like this. "Sir, support his head." One of the nurses reminded him. Alexander frowned slightly. "I know, but everyone could tell." He didn't know. This was the first time he had ever held a baby. His hands were made for signing contracts and controlling businesses, not holding something as fragile as a newborn child. Slowly, carefully, he picked me up. At first, his movements were stiff, almost awkward. I could feel how nervous he was. It was almost funny. The most powerful man in America was afraid of hurting a tiny baby. Inside my mind, I couldn't help but think, so this is the terrifying Alexander Walker, The man everyone fears. He looks more scared than I am. I wanted to laugh, but all that came out was a small baby sound. Alexander immediately looked down. What happened? His voice changed. Everyone noticed. The coldness disappeared. Only for a moment, but it was enough. Mrs. Wilson looked shocked. Sir. Alexander ignored her. He looked at me carefully. Did I hurt him? Nobody answered, because nobody knew how to react. The same man who never cared about anyone's feelings was worried about a baby's expression. The nurse smiled. No, Mr. Walker, he's fine. Alexander looked unconvinced. He made a sound. Babies do that. The nurse paused, because that's normal. For the first time, everyone saw something unbelievable. Alexander Walker didn't know how to take care of a child. Then something happened that nobody expected. I grabbed his finger. It was an instinct. My tiny hand wrapped around his finger, and Alexander froze, completely. His eyes widened slightly. It was such a small thing, something ordinary, but for him, felt different. I looked at his face, and I saw it, a feeling he tried to hide, confusion, surprise, and something else, something warm. His hand is so small, Alexander whispered. Mrs. Wilson looked away, trying to hide her emotional reaction. She had worked for the Walker family for decades. She knew Alexander better than anyone. She knew this man never showed weakness. But now, a baby had broken through his walls in less than 10 minutes. Alexander gently moved his finger, but I refused to let go. My grip became tighter. He looked at me. Then he said something nobody expected. I'm your father. The room became silent. Even his secretary, Ryan, who had followed him for years, looked stunned. Ryan had seen Alexander threaten business partners. He had seen him make people apologize. He had seen him walk away from millions of dollars without blinking. But he had never heard Alexander speak so softly. Ryan whispered, "Is that really Mr. Walker?" Nobody answered, because they were all thinking the same thing. But then my sister started crying. Emma. The moment her cry filled the room, I became restless. I didn't know why. Maybe it was because we were twins. Maybe it was because, in this new life, she was the only person who shared my beginning. But hearing her cry made me uncomfortable. Alexander noticed immediately. He looked toward Emma's crib. Then he looked back at me. You're worried about her. Of course, I couldn't answer, but my expression probably said enough. He frowned, then looked at Mrs. Wilson. Why is he reacting like this? Mrs. Wilson quickly explained. Sir, the twins are very close. They're newborns, yes, but they seem connected. When one cries, the other becomes upset. Alexander looked surprised. They can't be separated. For now. No. He looked at Emma, then back at me. For some reason, his expression became serious. Bring her here. Everyone froze. Mrs. Wilson almost couldn't believe what she heard. Sir, I said bring my daughter here. Daughter. Another word nobody expected from him. A few minutes later, Emma was brought over. The moment I saw her, I reached out. She stopped crying. The entire room became quiet. Alexander watched us hold hands. Two tiny babies. One brother, one sister, and for the first time, the billionaire who had spent his entire life believing emotions were useless, felt something he couldn't explain. Family. That night, something happened that shocked everyone in Walker Manor. Alexander Walker didn't leave. Usually, he would visit for a few minutes and return to work. But that night, he stayed. He sat beside our crib, watching us sleep. Ryan stood nearby, completely confused. Mr. Walker. Alexander didn't look up. Yes, your meeting with the board starts in 30 minutes. Cancel it. Ryan froze. Cancel. Yes, but that meeting has been scheduled for 3 months. Alexander finally looked at him. My children are sleeping. Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it. He suddenly realized something terrifying. Not because Alexander was angry, but because Alexander was serious. The man who had never canceled anything for anyone, canceled a major business meeting because his babies were sleeping. The next morning, the entire business world received shocking news. Alexander Walker had canceled his schedule. No one knew why. Some people guessed there was a crisis. Others thought a major acquisition had failed. Nobody imagined the truth. The most powerful billionaire in America was sitting in his son's room, holding a baby bottle, trying to feed his child, and failing miserably. Why isn't he drinking? Alexander stared at the bottle like it was a difficult business problem. The nanny tried not to smile. Sir, you have to tilt it slightly. I did. More. Alexander adjusted it. Finally, I started drinking. The room became silent. Then, Alexander smiled. A real smile. A smile nobody in the Walker family had seen in years. And at that moment, everyone understood. The coldest man in America had finally found his weakness. Not money, not power, not success. His weakness was his son. And little did he know, his son would soon become the person who changed the entire Walker family forever. Before I was born, the Walker family was known as the most powerful family in America. But there was one thing everyone knew about them. They were not warm. They were not close. They were successful. That was all. The Walker family didn't believe in showing emotions. To them, love was a weakness. Business came first. Power came first. The family name came first. Even Alexander Walker, the head of the empire, lived by that rule. At least, that was who he used to be, because after I was born, everything started changing. Slowly, quietly, and nobody could stop it. 3 months after my birth, Walker Manor was no longer the same place. Before, the mansion was always silent. Employees walked carefully. Everyone spoke in low voices. Nobody dared to disturb Alexander Walker. But now, the atmosphere had completely changed. Where is Ethan? Has he eaten? Did he sleep well? Who was watching him this morning? Those were the questions people asked every day. Not about business, not about money, not about the company, about me, the little baby who somehow became the center of the Walker family. I was lying on the carpet in the living room, playing with a toy. My sister Emma was sitting beside me. Even though she was only a few months old, she already had a completely different personality. She was quiet, calm, almost too serious for a baby. The nurses joked that she looked more like a tiny CEO than a newborn. But whenever I reached for her hand, she always grabbed mine, like she was afraid I would disappear. I found that strangely comforting. In my previous life, I had spent years alone. But in this life, I had someone who had been with me since the beginning. My twin sister. Of course, the biggest change was my father, Alexander Walker, the man who once thought children were nothing but responsibilities, had become completely different. One morning, I woke up and saw him sitting beside my crib. Again, I stared at him. He stared back. Neither of us moved. Finally, he spoke. "You're awake." I blinked. Obviously, I had just opened my eyes. But Alexander looked completely serious, as if he was having an important business conversation. He picked me up carefully. "Did you sleep well?" I looked at him. Then I looked at the nanny. The nanny immediately turned away, trying not to laugh. Because the billionaire who could negotiate billion-dollar contracts was asking a baby about his sleep. Alexander noticed her reaction. "What?" The nanny quickly shook her head. "Nothing, sir." He frowned. I asked a normal question. "Yes, sir." But everyone knew. It wasn't normal. Not for Alexander Walker. The biggest shock happened when the Walker family members started visiting. My grandfather, Richard Walker, was the first one. The legendary general, the man who had spent decades commanding soldiers, the man who never showed fear. When he entered my room, everyone expected him to remain cold. But the moment he saw me, he stopped, completely. He stared at me for several seconds. Then he asked, "That's my grandson." Mrs. Wilson smiled. "Yes, Mr. Walker." Richard stepped closer. He looked at me. Then he looked at Alexander. "So this is why you canceled your meetings?" Alexander remained calm. "Yes." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You canceled a billion-dollar negotiation because of a baby." Alexander didn't hesitate. "Yes." Everyone became silent. Nobody expected him to admit it. Richard looked at him for a long moment. Then something unbelievable happened. He laughed. A real laugh. "I never thought I would see this day." Alexander frowned. "What?" "Nothing." Richard shook his head. "I just never imagined my son would become a father who cares." Alexander looked away, but he didn't deny it, because he knew it was true. Soon, the rest of the family began coming. My older cousin, Ethan's older brother figure, Michael Walker, was the first to lose control. He was originally known as the future heir of the younger generation. Cold, confident, proud. But when he saw me, everything changed. He walked closer. "Can I hold him?" Everyone looked surprised. Michael had never asked to hold anyone's baby before. Alexander looked at him carefully. "Be careful." Michael rolled his eyes. "I know." But when he actually held me, his entire expression softened. "He's so small." Nobody said anything, because that was the exact same reaction Alexander had. The Walker family had a problem. A serious problem. They were all falling for one baby. Of course, not everyone was happy. A powerful family always had people watching, people calculating, people waiting, and some people were not comfortable seeing me become the center of attention, especially those who believed the Walker inheritance should belong to someone else. During a family dinner, one relative finally spoke. "Alexander, isn't this too much?" Everyone looked at him. He continued, "The child is still young. Giving him so much attention might not be wise." The room became quiet. Everyone knew what he meant. He wasn't talking about attention. He was talking about my position, my inheritance, my future. Alexander slowly placed his glass down. Then he looked at me, sitting in his arms. His expression became cold again. The old Alexander Walker returned. The businessman everyone feared. "Are you questioning my decision?" The man immediately became nervous. "No, I just think." Alexander interrupted. "You think too much." Silence. Then he continued. "My son doesn't need to prove his worth. He was born a Walker. He already belongs here." Nobody dared to speak again. And at that moment, I understood something. Alexander might have been cold before, but once he accepted someone as family, he would protect them with everything he had. That night, something even more surprising happened. Alexander created a family group chat. Everyone received a message. Alexander Walker uploaded a video. Nobody understood. Why would Alexander send a video? Then they opened it and froze. It was me, sitting on the floor, laughing, playing with my sister. For several seconds, nobody responded. Then the messages started flooding in. "Michael, is this Ethan? My aunt." He smiled. "Richard, send it again." Another family member. "Why does he look so cute?" Alexander looked at the messages. For the first time, he didn't care about business notifications. He only cared about one thing, showing everyone his son. The same man who once avoided family gatherings was now proudly sharing baby videos. But while everyone was celebrating, someone else was watching. Someone who didn't smile. Someone who didn't feel happy. A young man stared at the video on his phone. Then he slowly clenched his fist. So everyone is choosing him now. His eyes became cold. A baby changed everything. He looked at the screen, at my smiling face, then whispered, "Let's see how long this love lasts." I didn't know it yet, but becoming the most loved child in the Walker family also made me the biggest target, and the battle for the Walker Empire was about to begin. Before I was born, the Walker family was known as a family without warmth. People admired them, people feared them, but nobody wanted to get close to them, because everyone knew one thing: the Walkers were powerful, but they were also cold. However, that changed after I arrived. One baby, one tiny child, and somehow, the entire family began acting differently. By the time I turned 1 year old, my name was already known among America's richest families. Not because I had done anything, I was just a baby, but because of my father, Alexander Walker, the billionaire who once never cared about family gatherings, now spent every free moment with me. The same man who used to reject interviews suddenly allowed reporters to photograph him holding his son. The same man who never smiled in public was now caught laughing because I grabbed his tie. The internet couldn't understand. Did Alexander Walker really change? Is the coldest billionaire in America finally human? People had endless questions, but nobody knew the truth. The reason Alexander Walker changed was simple. Me. My first birthday became the biggest event of the year. The Walker family didn't simply hold a birthday party. They created a national sensation. Top executives, famous celebrities, powerful politicians, members of old money families. Everyone wanted an invitation, not because of the party, but because they wanted to see the child who changed Alexander Walker. Inside the mansion, everyone was busy preparing. I sat on the sofa while my older brother Michael looked at two different outfits. He looked more nervous than someone preparing for a business negotiation. Which one should Ethan wear? The staff looked confused. Sir, both are handmade. Michael frowned. That doesn't answer my question. One employee carefully replied, the red outfit matches your necklace. Michael nodded seriously. Then the red one. I stared at him. He spent 20 minutes choosing clothes for me. In my previous life, nobody had ever cared what I wore. Now, people were fighting over my birthday clothes. Life was strange. My sister Emma sat beside me quietly. Even though she was only 1 year old, she already had the personality of someone much older. She watched everyone preparing. Then she looked at me. She reached out and grabbed my hand. I smiled. She always did that. Whenever there were too many people around, she held my hand, like she was protecting me. The nanny once joked, Miss Emma acts like she is the older sister. Technically, she was older than me by 30 minutes. But honestly, she acted like my bodyguard. Then my father walked in. The entire room became quiet. Not because he was scary, because everyone was waiting for his reaction. Alexander looked at me. I was wearing the red outfit Michael chose. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he walked over. Perfect. Everyone froze. Alexander Walker had just praised something. And it wasn't a business decision. It was his son. He picked me up. Are you ready? I grabbed his jacket. He smiled slightly. Yes, I know. Nobody understood how amazing that moment was. The man who once thought children were unnecessary was now talking to a 1-year-old like he was having a serious conversation. When the birthday ceremony began, the entire room became silent. Alexander carried me onto the stage. Everyone watched. Many of those people had worked with him for years. They had seen his ruthless side. They knew he was a man who never gave second chances. But today, he was holding his son carefully, almost protectively. One guest whispered, I can't believe this is Alexander Walker. Another replied, he looks like a completely different person. Then Alexander stepped forward. He looked at everyone. I have an announcement. The room immediately became serious. Everyone thought he was going to discuss business. Maybe a new company. Maybe a major investment. Nobody expected what came next. Alexander looked down at me, then said, I am transferring 10% of Walker Global Holdings to my son, Ethan Walker. Silence. Absolute silence. For a moment, nobody reacted. Then the entire room exploded. 10% of Walker Global Holdings. That's impossible. Everyone knew what that meant. Walker Global Holdings was not an ordinary company. It was one of the most valuable corporations in America. 10% was a fortune beyond imagination. And Alexander had just given it to a 1-year-old child. A businessman approached carefully. Mr. Walker, forgive me, but Ethan is still too young. Alexander looked at him. The man immediately felt pressure. I only mean, perhaps this decision should wait. Alexander's expression turned cold. The same expression that terrified the business world returned. My son's age doesn't determine his value. Nobody spoke. He continued, he is my heir. He is a member of this family. And nobody has the right to question that. The businessman lowered his head. Yes, Mr. Walker, that was the end of the discussion. But while everyone was shocked by the announcement, I was only interested in one thing, the giant birthday cake. It was shaped like a fantasy castle. The decorations were incredible. I stared at it, then pointed. Cake. Everyone laughed. Alexander looked down. You want that? I nodded. He smiled. Of course. He picked me up and walked toward it. The entire room watched. The billionaire CEO, the man who controlled thousands of employees, was now happily helping his son touch a birthday cake. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. A little girl from another wealthy family walked toward me. She looked at the expensive decorations around her. Then at me. You're lucky. Her mother immediately pulled her back. "Don't be rude." But the girl continued, "You have everything." I looked at her. I didn't understand why she sounded unhappy, because I knew something she didn't. Money wasn't everything. In my previous life, I had learned that the thing I wanted most wasn't wealth. It was family, and now I finally had one. At the end of the party, Alexander stood near the window holding me. The mansion was quiet again, but this time, it wasn't cold. Felt like home. He looked at me. "You know something, Ethan?" I looked at him. I used to think having a child was a weakness. He paused, then smiled. I was wrong. I stared at him, because those words meant more than anyone realized. The man who once rejected me was now the person who protected me the most. But neither of us knew that while the entire country was celebrating my existence, someone inside the Walker family was preparing to destroy everything I had gained. And his first target was me. When I was born, nobody expected me to change the Walker family. Not even me. In my previous life, I spent years searching for a place where I belonged. I wanted someone to care about me, someone to ask if I was tired, someone to notice when I was hurting. But I never found that person. Yet in this life, I was surrounded by people who cared too much. Sometimes, almost too much, because after my first birthday, the Walker family developed a strange problem. Everyone wanted to be my favorite. It started with my older brother Michael. Before I was born, Michael was known as the most promising young member of the Walker family. Smart, calm, confident. Many people believed he would become one of the future leaders of Walker Global Holdings. But after I arrived, his priorities completely changed. One morning, I woke up and found him sitting beside my crib. Again, he was holding a book. I stared at him, then I looked at the book. It was a business strategy book. I almost laughed. Was he really studying next to a baby? Michael noticed my expression. "What?" I blinked. He frowned. "Don't look at me like that." I obviously couldn't answer, but my eyes probably said everything. "You're a grown man reading business books next to a baby." Michael cleared his throat. "I'm not here only to study." He paused, then added, "I'm here because you woke up." I froze. This guy was hopeless. He was pretending to have a reason, but everyone knew the truth. He just wanted to see me. The problem was, he wasn't the only one. My sisters were even worse. Emma, my twin sister, had always been quiet. She rarely cried. She rarely caused trouble. But when it came to me, she became completely different. If someone picked me up, she watched. If someone carried me away, she followed. If someone gave me a toy, she checked it first. The nanny once joked, "Miss Emma is acting like Ethan's personal security guard." Everyone laughed, but I knew she was serious. My sister really protected me. Then there was my uncle, Daniel Walker. He was completely different from Michael. Michael was serious. Daniel was playful. He was the kind of person who made everyone laugh. Before I was born, Daniel was famous for avoiding responsibility. Family meetings, he disappeared. Business events, he found excuses. But after I arrived, everything changed. One day, he rushed into the house. "Where is Ethan?" The servants were shocked. "Mr. Daniel, you just arrived." "I know. You haven't even taken off your coat." "I don't care." Everyone looked confused. Then Daniel walked into the room holding a huge box. Alexander looked at him. "What is that?" Daniel smiled proudly. "A gift. For Ethan." "Of course." Alexander narrowed his eyes. "What did you buy?" Daniel opened the box. Inside was a custom-made toy car. Not a normal toy car. A miniature version of one of Alexander's luxury vehicles. The servants were speechless. Alexander looked at him. "You spent that much on a toy?" Daniel shrugged. "He's my nephew." That answer surprised everyone. Because for the first time, Daniel wasn't thinking about money. He was thinking about family. Of course, my father noticed everything. And he was not happy. Not because people loved me, because everyone was stealing my attention. One afternoon, I was sitting in Michael's arms. Daniel was standing beside him. Emma was holding my hand, and Alexander walked in. He stopped. He looked at the scene. 3 people surrounding me. His expression became complicated. Michael immediately noticed. Dad. Alexander looked at him. Give Ethan to me. Michael raised an eyebrow. He's comfortable. He's my son. He's also my brother. The room became silent. Nobody expected Michael to challenge Alexander. But then Daniel laughed. Oh, this is interesting. Alexander looked at him. What? Daniel smiled. Are you jealous? Everyone froze. Even I wanted to laugh. Because he was right. The great Alexander Walker, the billionaire who controlled an empire, was jealous of his own family members. Alexander's face became serious. I'm not jealous. Nobody believed him. Not even himself. That night, something even stranger happened. Alexander created a new rule. Ethan's schedule needs to be organized. Everyone looked confused. A schedule? For a 1-year-old. Alexander continued. Morning time with me. Michael immediately interrupted. What about my time? Alexander looked at him. Your time? Yes. I didn't approve it. Michael frowned. He's my brother. He's my son. The room became a battlefield. A ridiculous battlefield. Everyone was fighting over a baby. Me. I sat there quietly, watching the most powerful family in America argue about who got to spend more time with me. In my previous life, I would never have imagined this. But happiness never lasts forever without challenges. One evening, I overheard a conversation. I was too young to understand everything. But I understood one thing. Someone was unhappy. A man's voice came from outside the room. Alexander has changed. Another person replied, because of the child. The first voice became colder. Before Ethan arrived, everything was predictable. Silence. Then he said, now everything belongs to that child. I stopped moving. They were talking about me. The person continued, the Walker inheritance should not belong to a baby. My small hands tightened. So this was finally happening. The moment I knew would come. A family this powerful would never stay peaceful forever. Because where there was wealth, there was always greed. The next day, something strange happened. Alexander received an anonymous message. Usually, he ignored everything. Threats, warnings, enemies. Nothing affected him. But when he saw the message, his expression changed. The message only contained one sentence. Your son is the reason you will lose everything. For the first time in a long time, Alexander Walker looked truly angry. He immediately called his security team. Find out who sent this. The assistant hesitated. Sir, do you think Ethan is in danger? Alexander looked toward me. I was playing with my toys, unaware of anything. Then he answered. His voice was colder than ever. No one touches my son. That was the moment everyone understood. Ethan Walker was no longer just the youngest member of the family. He was Alexander Walker's greatest weakness. And anyone who tried to hurt him would have to face the entire Walker family. But they didn't know something. They thought I was just a baby. They thought I couldn't understand anything. They were wrong. Because inside this tiny body was someone who had already lived one life. And this time, I would protect the family that finally loved me. I used to believe that being loved was the hardest thing to find. In my previous life, I spent years searching for it. I wanted someone to choose me, someone to protect me, someone to tell me that I mattered. But after I was reborn into the Walker family, I finally understood something. Love was not the only thing that came with power. Power also attracted jealousy. And the bigger the family became, the more enemies appeared. After my first birthday, the entire Walker family became more protective of me. Too protective. If I coughed once, 3 doctors appeared. If I looked tired, my father canceled meetings. If I reached for something dangerous, someone immediately moved it away. Sometimes I felt like I wasn't the youngest member of the family. I felt like the president of a country surrounded by security. One afternoon, I was sitting in Alexander's office. Of course, I wasn't there to work. I was playing with a small toy car on his desk. My father was reviewing documents. The employees outside were terrified, because everyone knew something unusual was happening. Alexander Walker, the man who demanded complete silence during meetings, allowed his son to play in his office. A secretary quietly whispered, "Is Mr. Walker really letting a child stay during a board meeting?" Another employee answered, "Not only that, He moved the meeting time because Ethan was sleeping. Nobody could believe it. The same man who once forced executives to wait hours outside his office was now waiting for his son to wake up. My father noticed me staring at him. What? I pointed at the documents. He looked confused. You want to see this? I nodded. Of course. I didn't actually understand every word, but I wanted to know what kind of world he lived in. Alexander smiled slightly. You're curious. He picked me up. Good. I looked at him. Then he said something I never expected. You'll learn everything about this company one day. My heart skipped, because I knew what he meant. He wasn't talking about money. He was talking about the future. My future. For the first time in 2 lives. Someone believed in me before I had proven anything. But not everyone shared my father's feelings. Inside the Walker family, there were people who were becoming more uncomfortable. Because before I appeared, everyone already knew their place. The family had rules. The inheritance had expectations. The future was planned. But my birth changed everything. A child who was supposed to be unwanted became the person Alexander protected the most. And some people could not accept that. One night, I woke up because I heard voices outside my room. I couldn't move like an adult. Couldn't walk away. But I could listen. 2 people were talking. I still don't understand. A man's voice. Why does Alexander care so much about that child? Another voice answered, because Ethan is his son. The first man laughed coldly. Before Ethan was born, the family had a different future. I became still. The family had a different future. The voice continued, now everything belongs to a baby who doesn't even understand what is happening. I knew that voice. It belonged to someone from the Walker family. Someone close enough to know everything. Someone who had access. That was the most dangerous kind of enemy. The next morning, something happened. Alexander called a family meeting. Everyone gathered. The atmosphere was serious. I sat in my father's arms. Usually, family meetings were about business. But this time, it was about me. Alexander looked around the room. I received a warning yesterday. Everyone became quiet. Michael frowned. A warning. Alexander nodded. Someone threatened Ethan. The temperature in the room instantly dropped. My grandfather Richard's expression changed. The same man who faced battlefields without fear looked furious. Who? Alexander didn't answer immediately, because he didn't know yet, but his eyes became colder. We are investigating. One family member spoke carefully. Alexander, are you sure this is necessary? Maybe it was just someone trying to scare you. The moment he finished speaking, everyone looked at him, because his words were suspicious. Why was he defending the person who threatened me? My father noticed too. Interesting. The man froze. What? Alexander stared at him. You seem very certain it was only a threat. Silence. The man immediately changed his expression. I was just saying. But the damage was already done. Everyone noticed, including me. After the meeting ended, Alexander held me tighter than usual. I looked at his face. He was angry, but not at me, at himself. Maybe he blamed himself. Maybe he thought he failed to protect me. He whispered, I should have been more careful. I stared at him. This was the same man who once didn't even want me. Now he was blaming himself because someone might hurt me. People really could change. That evening, my grandfather Richard visited. He looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at Alexander. You changed. Alexander didn't answer. Richard smiled. When you were younger, you only cared about winning. Alexander looked away. And now, Richard looked at me. Now you finally have something worth protecting. For once, Alexander didn't argue, because he knew his father was right. But while my family was protecting me, someone else was making a plan that involved my identity, my inheritance, and my future. The person believed one thing. I was only a baby. I couldn't fight back. I couldn't understand. I couldn't stop them. They were wrong, because they didn't know the truth. I wasn't just Ethan Walker. I was someone who had already lost everything once. Someone who had already experienced betrayal. Someone who knew exactly what people were capable of. And this time, I would not be powerless. A few days later, something strange happened. I was playing with my toys when I suddenly noticed something. A A strange symbol appeared above one of the servants. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I blinked. It disappeared. Then it appeared again. Red letters, floating in the air. My small hands froze. What was happening? Why could I see something nobody else could? I looked around. Nobody reacted. Nobody noticed. Only me. And then I understood. My rebirth had given me something more than a second chance. It had given me a secret, power, a way to see the truth hidden behind people. I stared at the red letters, and for the first time, I smiled, because the people who wanted to destroy me thought they were fighting against a helpless child. They didn't know. They had just awakened the one person in this family who could see through every lie. And the real battle for the Walker Empire was about to begin. I thought being reborn was already the greatest miracle of my life. I was wrong, because my second life didn't just give me a new family. It gave me something else, something impossible, something that would completely change my future. After I discovered the strange red letters above people's heads, I spent days trying to understand what was happening. At first, I thought I was dreaming. After all, how could a baby see things that no one else could? But every time I focused on someone, the words appeared. Secrets, information, things people tried to hide. And the strangest part was, they were always true. The first person I tested it on was my nanny, Mrs. Wilson. She had taken care of me since I was born. She was one of the few people in the Walker family who had shown me genuine kindness. When she walked into my room, I looked at her carefully. The red letters appeared. Margaret Wilson, age 62, loyal to the Walker family for 40 years. I blinked. That was normal. Then more words appeared. Greatest regret. Not protecting Alexander when he was young. I froze. I didn't expect that. The ability didn't just show facts. It showed feelings, hidden emotions, the things people never said out loud. Then I looked at my father, Alexander Walker. The moment I focused on him, the letters appeared, but they were different. Much longer, much more complicated. I couldn't read everything, but one sentence caught my attention. The person he fears losing the most, Ethan Walker. I stared at it. For a moment, I forgot to breathe. My father, the man who once didn't want me, was afraid of losing me. I looked at Alexander. He was sitting at his desk, working, completely focused. He had no idea what I could see. No idea that I now knew his biggest weakness. Me. That night, I watched him from my crib. He thought I was asleep, but he sat beside me anyway. He gently adjusted my blanket. Then he whispered, "You're too young to understand this." I looked at him. He continued, "But I'm sorry." My heart tightened. Sorry. Alexander Walker was apologizing to a baby. I should have been there from the beginning. He lowered his head. I wasted too much time. For someone else, those words might seem simple. But for him, they meant everything, because Alexander Walker was not someone who admitted mistakes. Not to anyone, not even himself. The next morning, another shocking thing happened. My grandfather Richard came to visit. He brought an old photo album. I watched him carefully. The moment I focused on him, the letters appeared. Richard Walker, former military commander, never apologized to anyone in his life. I almost laughed. That sounded exactly like him. Then another line appeared. Greatest regret. Not teaching his family how to love. I became quiet, because suddenly, I understood. The Walker family wasn't cold because they didn't care. They were cold because nobody had taught them how to show it. They had spent generations chasing strength, but forgot something important. Strength without love was loneliness. However, my ability also showed me something dangerous. Not everyone around me was sincere. One afternoon, a new assistant entered the house. Everyone greeted him politely, but the moment I looked at him, the letters appeared. My expression changed. Name Victor Hayes. Position, personal assistant. Hidden intention, gather information about Ethan Walker. I immediately became alert. Someone was watching me, not because they cared, because they wanted something. I looked at him again. More information appeared, connected to someone inside the Walker family. My small hands tightened. Someone inside the family was involved. I needed to know who, but I couldn't speak. couldn't walk. I was trapped in a baby's body. For the first time since my rebirth, I felt powerless. Then my sister Emma crawled over. She grabbed my hand, the same way she always did. I looked at her. The red letters appeared, but unlike everyone else, her information was simple. Emma Walker, twin sister, will always protect Ethan. I smiled. My sister was exactly who I thought she was. Pure, honest, my first real family member. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. Alexander called an emergency meeting. The reason? Someone had leaked confidential company information. Everyone in the room was serious. The Walker family was powerful, but even powerful families had enemies. One executive said, "Someone close to us is helping outsiders." The room became silent. Alexander looked around. His eyes were cold. Find them. Nobody moved, because everyone knew what would happen to the person who betrayed him. Then someone said, "Maybe we should reconsider Ethan's inheritance." The moment those words came out, the entire room froze. Alexander slowly turned. "What did you say?" The executive swallowed. "I only mean that Ethan is young. Perhaps the shares should be controlled by someone more experienced." Before Alexander could answer, I reached out and grabbed his hand. Everyone looked at me. Alexander looked down, and his anger disappeared instantly. He picked me up, then looked back at the executive. "My son's future is not a discussion." His voice was cold. "He doesn't need permission to exist." Nobody spoke, because everyone understood. Alexander Walker had made his choice. Later that night, I used my ability again. This time, I looked at the entire Walker family, and I finally saw the truth. Some people loved me. Some people protected me. Some people wanted to use me. But there was one person whose information shocked me the most. Person I never expected. Someone who had been pretending for a long time. The red letters appeared, and one sentence made my heart stop. Betrayed the Walker family. The person responsible for future destruction. I stared at the name. Impossible. That person was someone I trusted. Someone inside my own family. I didn't cry. I didn't panic, because I had already lived one life. I knew what betrayal felt like, but this time was different. Before, I had no power. Now, I had a family worth protecting. A father who loved me. A sister who needed me. A grandfather who finally found happiness. And a secret ability that showed me the truth. The people trying to destroy the Walker family didn't know what they had awakened. They thought they were fighting against a helpless child. But they were wrong, because this baby had already died once. And this time, I was ready to fight back. 窗体顶端. I used to believe that being born into a powerful family meant having everything. Money, status, a future. But after living 2 lives, I finally understood something. The most valuable thing in the world was never wealth. It was having people who would stand beside you when everything fell apart. And in this life, I finally had that. When I first arrived in the Walker family, nobody expected me to change anything. I was just an unwanted baby. A child my father once considered a mistake. A child my mother left behind. But everything changed the moment Alexander Walker held me for the first time. The man who had spent his entire life building an empire finally found something more important than business, his son. After discovering my ability, I started paying closer attention to the people around me. I knew there were enemies inside the family. I knew someone wanted to use me, but I also knew something else. The Walker family was no longer the cold family I remembered. They had changed. Because of me. One morning, I was sitting in the living room with my father. Alexander was reading business reports. I was playing with a toy on his lap. A normal scene for us now, but impossible for anyone who knew the old Alexander Walker. His assistant entered the room. "Mr. Walker, the board meeting is ready." Alexander didn't move. "Reschedule it." The assistant hesitated. Again, Alexander looked up. "Yes, sir. This is the 3rd time this week." Alexander glanced at me. I was holding onto his sleeve. Then he calmly replied, "My son wants me here." The assistant immediately lowered his head. "Yes, sir." I almost laughed. The same man who once controlled an entire empire was now controlled by a tiny child grabbing his sleeve. Later that day, My grandfather Richard came to visit. He looked at me for a long time. Then he smiled. You know what's funny? I stared at him. He continued, before you were born, this family was full of people who knew how to win. He looked at Alexander. But none of us knew how to be happy. Alexander didn't answer, because he knew it was true. Richard placed his hand on my head. You changed everyone. I didn't say anything, but inside, I knew. They changed me too. My biggest surprise was my father. Alexander Walker was not perfect. He still struggled to express his feelings. He still acted serious. He still treated everything like a business problem, including parenting. One night, I woke up and saw him standing beside my crib. He thought everyone was asleep. He quietly said, Ethan. I looked at him. I don't know if I'm doing this right. I froze. My father, the strongest businessman in America, admitting he was unsure. He continued, I spent my entire life learning how to control everything. But when it comes to you, he stopped, then smiled sadly. I have no idea what I'm doing. For some reason, those words touched me more than anything, because they were honest. He wasn't pretending to be the perfect father. He was simply trying. Years passed quickly. By the time I turned 3, everyone in America knew my name, Ethan Walker, the youngest heir of Walker Global Holdings. But the public only saw the wealth. They didn't see the small moments. They didn't see my grandfather secretly buying toys. They didn't see my brother fighting with my sisters over who got to spend time with me. They didn't see my father checking my room every night before sleeping. They didn't see the family that had once forgotten how to love, learning again. Of course, my enemies did not disappear. The people who wanted my inheritance eventually revealed themselves. They thought I was only a child. They thought I couldn't understand. But they forgot something. I wasn't a normal child. I had already lived an entire life. I knew betrayal. I knew greed. I knew the difference between fake kindness and real love. With my ability, I exposed every hidden lie. The people who planned against the Walker family lost everything. The ones who tried to use me were removed, and the people who truly cared about me remained. Years later, when people asked about the Walker family's greatest achievement, most expected them to mention their companies, their wealth, their influence. But my father always gave the same answer. My greatest achievement was becoming Ethan's father. Nobody believed it, because Alexander Walker was once known as a man without emotions, a man who valued success above everything. But one child changed him. One child changed an entire family. Looking back, I often thought about my previous life, the lonely child who had nobody, the person who thought he would never be loved. If I could speak to that person, I would tell him, don't give up. Sometimes losing everything is the beginning of finding something better, because death gave me a second chance, and that second chance gave me the family I always wanted. I was once a child nobody expected, a child my own father almost rejected, but I became the person who changed America's most powerful family. I didn't inherit the Walker Empire because of my blood. I earned my place because I changed the hearts of the people who built it. And in the end, the greatest treasure I received was never the billions of dollars. It was hearing the words I had waited my entire life to hear. Ethan, you are our family. And this time, I knew they meant it.